So firstly, I just wanted to ask, you're currently touring you currently have three main works: Yellow Towel, which premiered in 2013, Mercurial George in 2016, and then Cutler Spring in 2019. And we'll be introducing Mercurial George to our audiences in Kyoto, which is the middle kind of work in chronological order. But I think a lot of what the Mercurial George is influenced by Yellow Towel. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about kind of where Mercurial George came from in terms of how it's influenced by Yellow Towel for our audiences who perhaps haven't seen Yellow Towel. And yeah, talk a little bit about how the relationship between those two works and where Mercurial George comes from in terms of Yellow Towel. I think you previously said that it's kind of like a close-up of Mercurial George is kind of a close-up of some elements of Yellow Towel. Mm-hmm. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what those elements are and how those developed.
Mm-hmm. So I think that there's just perpetually a kind of, what are these called? Nesting dolls? Russian dolls? No, not Russian dolls. But you know, these like, there's like a big doll and then there's a smaller doll. I think that this is perpetually kind of happening in my work, or the way that I approach it. Because kind of one thought leads to the other. And then for Mercurial George, it was just, yeah, with Mercurial George and with any work that I've ever made, it's the next piece that I do is always a kind of, well, now I'm interested in that and that thing. So I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at those things in the next piece. So they're always really touching like quite a bit and there's always a bit of overlap. Mm-hmm. When you say like what like kind of the microscope maybe focused on, like what cells fell out of Yellow Towel and then into Mercurial George, I think it's like there's a general wash of an attitude that I discovered in making Yellow Towel, mm-hmm. a kind of like maybe a punk fell out of Yellow Towel. I was like, oh, I think I think I have an affinity to punk, mm-hmm. is what I discovered in Yellow Towel. Like, I mean, this thought has kind of always been there again, but it became like really pronounced after I did Yellow Towel. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was one thing I can talk about is this kind of like, I'm picturing like a concrete mixer of like punk sauce, and that's maybe Mercurial George is kind of punk sauce. But then there's like really specific things. Oh, I've discovered that something that is not only interesting for me, but really important for me is this idea of, I can be doing archival work somehow, like family archival work inside of these works that I make. And I'm really specific when I say that, I mean specifically object-wise, for instance. Mm-hmm. Objects that are important to me or that trigger memories or trigger kind of like a bigger thoughtscapes. Mm-hmm. I kind of try and rescue them from my family home or from my family's homes. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I think in Yellow Towel, the only object that this happened with, there's like a vacuum brush that used to be an attachment on this like old 70s, like, oh, this beautiful filter clean vacuum that we had as a child that looked like R2-D2. And it's like, you know, these little things that, well, they're not little things. They really like etch themselves into your memory as a young person growing up. And like, mm-hmm. I'm really fascinated by how this informs our perspective on the world around us, these like kind of really particular objects that etch themselves into our memories. I'm taking a long time to answer this question. But so for instance, there was like this one vacuum brush that I used in Yellow Towel, to like disguise a cord somewhere. And in Mercurial George, there were quite a few of these. Then I rescued my childhood like hairbrush. I rescued my aunt's robe. That is like something that my aunt is kind of like, I would say, the like punk of the older generation in my family. And this robe had a specific smell. It just like kind of imprinted it. Anyway, my aunt's robe, I rescued my cousin who passed away the year before Mercurial George premiered. I rescued his robe. There's like quite a few things. Well, there's the like spray and starch that I use at the beginning, and this motor oil, which for me are like my parents. So there's quite a few things that I don't really think it's so interesting and important to get really specific about how I point to these things inside of the performance, but I'm going to start.
That's interesting because I think, and then your next piece, Cutler Spring, which is the piece that I first saw, I think when it premiered in Brussels in 2019, I saw that piece. And one of the things that first struck me when I saw your work was this amazing improvisational quality that the work has, not only in terms of movement, but also the way that voice is used as well. And I thought that was one of like the real amazing strengths of, or is one of the amazing strengths of your work as well. And I just wondered, could you talk a little bit about how you use that kind of improvisational element in your work, and how does that play into like how you create the work before as well, and how much of it do you feel is improvisational within the performance? What kind of barriers or rules or boundaries do you set for yourself while performing?
So what just happened there as you're asking that question is, I think there are ways that I might normally answer that, but I was thinking a lot about this yesterday inside of my personal life and inside of my house. I was thinking about kind of how annoying I am to myself, in that I kind of constantly have to be very engaged. Like no matter how small the activity, I've got to find a way to make it interesting and exciting and offer some kind of new perspective for myself. Because the brain is she needs a lot of entertainment. So it's like, I'm like, God, Dana, like it's so exhausting. Like I kind of constantly have to trick myself. As soon as I have figured out a pathway to something, then I'm like, great, this is logical, it's efficient, it works, it gets me to the place that I want to go to. Perfect. This is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I'll wake up and I'll be like, I'll do the exact opposite, systematically. And I was thinking about this in relation to my work, or the past few months of being at home has been really, really great in terms of seeing how my life choices, challenges, necessities feed into the choices that I make inside of my work, and vice versa. What I can learn from the choices that I make in my work, or the attitudes that I'm able to hold on to, and that help me, and how I'm like, oh, I could use some of that in my real life. So this kind of conversation is happening, and improvisation is just like, it's just, oh yeah. It's just, I did that, and I thought about this, like, there's this kind of Instagram person right now. Have you seen this girl with the chips and the glasses?
I haven't.
Mujumbo, I think is her name. I can't remember, but she's the most hilarious person I've ever seen.
I'm gonna look.
Speaking of improvisers. So I'm yeah, I just have it. I just like have a real desire for a challenge, for game playing. It's like a perpetual like stimulation machine, you know, and I'm constantly looking for that, and it's super linked to this, like, I need to learn. Like, I really like learning. I'm a really giant nerd, and so improvisation is like, I would say like my nerdiness meets my like jokiness. You know?
I mean, all of your works obviously are solo works, and I think that way of how you improvise or how you create your work in what we've just been talking about, the way that you kind of interrupt yourself or you don't want to fall into this groove, maybe has something to do with the fact that you create your work on your own as a solo work, which is, I mean, I guess that would work in a different way if there was another body on stage, for example. I mean, the work, Lay Them All Down, the video, that work that we're going to screen for Kyoto Experiment is a collaboration with a video artist. So I wondered, in terms of that, how is that different in terms of working with Tracy on that work, whereas you normally work alone? Like, how what was that like?
That was dreamy. That was so dreamy, and the video work, well, I mean, they both kind of, a few things arrived at the same time, but I mean, initially it's a live performance. Like the main kind of ingredient of the thought around Lay Them All Down is a live performance, and any kind of documentation was kind of happenstance, even though the main kind of like form is, I've invited Tracy, who's just like a brilliant, all kinds of artists, but she makes really brilliant video work. I invited her to like come make it. I was like, let's make a film, right? But the film was like, that's not the important part. The important part was me getting to hang out with Tracy, and for us to like get into improvisation mode together. That's like that was the main objective. Yeah, I mean, we're going to make a film in public, is what I said. We're going to make a live film. We're going to make a film in public, and this is an idea that I borrowed from. See, this is why I never make references, because my memory is terrible. Oh no, never mind. Just pretend I didn't talk about that. There's a Canadian director who had made a project similar to this the year before at a gallery. Just this idea of like, oh, but he was making an actual film. The goal was making a film, and he just like filmed it live inside of a gallery for some months. Anyway, I have noticed over the years that when I am making a piece and I'm working with another person or persons, that it really helps me to look at what I'm doing as filmmaking. So often I'm in rehearsal, not often, all the time. When I'm in rehearsal with other people, I can't just like sit there and like watch the work or stand there and like watch a run of something. I've got to actually pretend like I'm holding a video camera, or got to like change angles and pretend like I am a camera in order to look at something. And I find that it does a loosening of the way that I interpret what can happen with a moment. So I wanted to borrow this kind of like film director feeling and put it into this project with Tracy and I. Speaking of movies, everything is kind of a movie. Everything is kind of a movie with me. So there's definitely, I see it as, I'm in a movie. And the audience then becomes a kind of like, it just becomes like a hyper realistic movie theater.
Mm.
You know? Like I'm hyper CGI'd maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Like what do you call it? These IMAX experience. Maybe it's just like the most deluxe IMAX experience. I'm not trying to say that I'm hyper technology. It's super amazing to watch. I'm just talking about in terms of technology. It's like it's so IMAX that I'm just there actually in the room. Yeah, that's how I look at it, and the freedom in that is that I can do my thing. And try and mitigate this, like try to mitigate the empathic response that I could potentially have, and that could potentially derail what I could be capable of doing. And also as a way of letting people watch something without feeling like they need to be there for, when I say be there, to support the person who is doing the movie or to like, I don't know. So it's a way to like give us both freedom, really. Like I want you to just like be able to like look at this and not worry about how I feel about you looking at this. I mean, it's super like utopic. But don't worry about it. You're just in the movie theater. Like you go and watch a movie. You're not thinking about like, oh, what does Keanu Reeves think about the way I'm looking at him? I can't believe I just used Keanu Reeves as a example. But anyway, like you don't have to worry about that. You can just watch Keanu Reeves do his thing. Again, I'm not comparing myself to some Hollywood movie star. But do you know what I mean? It's just it's just a freedom tool. The way that I think about these setups, and there's probably a combination of things that happened with Cutler Spring, like in terms of why I decided to do this four-way thing. For sure, it's like sports influenced. It's definitely some sports feelings happening, and I think I was just ready after like 2 pieces of being like really, really far away. I'm not looking at anybody, you know, after however many years of being on tour and getting used to having eyes on me. I was like, maybe those eyes can be a little bit closer and I might feel okay. You know? And then also this thing of the work that I'm doing with objects that, for instance, in Yellow Towel, and you're like, there's not as many objects. And I'm like, there's quite a few objects. I'm just hiding them. They're just for me. So it's like, maybe I can just like do a little bit more sharing. And so if people are closer, then they actually have access to look at the things that are influencing what I'm doing or thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, yeah, because it's so personal, but then obviously there is this very definite distance, the space between the audience and you, which definitely gives that freedom, or just allows the audience to relax slightly, I think. So the last year, I guess, with coronavirus, with COVID, everyone's been affected in different ways, and it's obviously a difficult time as well for anyone creating performance work, in terms of touring and getting inside the theatre and things like this. But it's obviously also like a really interesting opportunity to reflect on a lot of things, and for the festival as well, it's been a kind of good opportunity to think about the normal way of doing things. Like what was the normal way of doing things? We can no longer do it in the normal way, in the normal time frame. So what does that mean, and what was that time frame that we were using before? And so I wondered, how has the last year just affected you in general, and how has it affected the way that you think about, you know, creating work in the future, or just on a small scale or on a bigger scale?
That's it. I was talking to my sister last night about this thing of trying to allow myself to be to be in a good mood in a bad time. Like what that means, or what that does, or like to not fight it, basically. Yeah, I'm lucky and fortunate to say that I've been having a good time. And like having a good time, I mean, I'm having a really good time being the turtle that I like to be. I'm having a really good time crying on the floor at any given part of the day for any amount of days, and being able to like to have the time to like, why am I crying? What does it mean? I just like, there's time to reflect and not just do and run. You know, of course, like before, it's like, okay, my moments for reflection were sitting on airplanes, being in airports, like, okay, in these moments I refuse to do like work or emails or whatever. But now there's so much of that. You know, you need to sit down and reflect on stuff if you're gonna do anything with like, what are all these actions and movements and pushings that we're doing if we don't have any time to reflect on them? And this is what we're like getting pushed more and more into, obviously, like, because we have so many tools to like make everything go. We have Instapots, do you know what I mean? Like, you just like, everything can be instant, and so it's just,
and therefore everything has to be incredibly productive all the time. And like moving in this very like good productive direction kind of.
Okay. So for me, it was a moment to like not have to be an Instant Pot. Like I can be like an actual just like proper slow cooker. And I can be a slow cooker, and I can be like a gramophone. I can just like really take time and think about what I've done and what it means, and how do I want to engage, like actually not just like in the future, but in general. Like this is a time for reassessment, and like, okay, so it's been a while since I've done like this like concentrated moment of like, who and what do I want to be in the world? Like, what is my participation? It's very important. Like, if you're not doing that work, it's just, it's a problem. It's a problem if you're not moving from like a place. Oh, I'm thinking about Solange now, the singer. You know, there's like this moment, like whatever one song, she's like, or it's not her, it's somebody saying, do nothing without intention. And it's like, it's true. So this is like, it's a moment to like think about that and feel it. And also for me, it's been like, I feel like I got married to art in this moment. I feel like I walked down the aisle and I got married to performance and art, and I got married to what I do. Before it was really like, I don't know, this might end tomorrow, it's fine, I don't, you know, kind of like looking at it sideways and not really, I don't need this stuff. It kind of, which, you know, is a tool for allowing me to just like be a little bit more broad in my approach, which can be good, but which can also hold a thing back. And I'm like, oh, well, I can have an open marriage. I can have a marriage with art, and it can still be an open marriage. I can still like define the parameters of the marriage, but I think it's important that I make some kind of, well, it wasn't even like, oh, I'm going to make a commitment. It just happened. I realized that, nah, this stuff is really important to me. And right now I can't practice it because we're in a certain like pyramid scheme, you know, we're in emergency zone. We've got to take care of health, and we've got to eat, And there's just like, we can only like focus on the basics. It doesn't mean, oh no, the basics are here, and I guess art is up here, whatever. But, you know, you gotta like make sure you've got like some solid, like you're alive and you're fed and you got a roof, and then you can move on to like next things. You can be like, okay, well now I'm bored, I need some music, okay. I could use some, I could really, you know, perform like, but there's so many moments where you're like, what am I doing? Like, who cares about this? Is anybody, who cares? And it's like, actually now I care, and it's helping me to survive. Like, I think 70% of this pandemic has been me dancing for several hours a day, sweating in my own house. I'm like, oh, wow, I really need this stuff. Like, I need it. It's keeping me alive. And my engagement with the body, I'm like, oh, because I often say, oh, you know, I write a score and I make a piece and then I throw my body at it at the last minute. The body. I'm like, the body's pretty important. Your relationship to the body is pretty important. And that I've realized that during the ironically, you know, I tour for all these years, and it's when I stop touring and when I can't go out dancing or anything that I'm like, oh yeah, the body's important. Well, yeah, that's normal to discover something is important when it's gone. Voila.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like, I don't know if you get asked this a lot, or maybe you don't, but in your profile, it talks, you've written a little bit about your background. I mean, you've had like a really diverse background in terms of you were a competitive runner and then a marketing exec, and then you made Yellow Towel. So I don't know if that has those really different experiences have something to do with what you just talked about, when, you know, having this period in order to reflect on that. Really, you know, you made 3 works and you were touring a lot, and then suddenly you had this time to kind of reflect on that. And yeah, I don't know, that's sounds really exciting.
Good time.
Yeah.
It is very exciting. I feel super, that's it, right? I'm like, I'm sorry, like, it's really disastrous what's happening. But inside this disaster, I'm like, well, this is what it took to slow stuff down.
Cool.
Did you ask me a question about the dance, about the marketing? And then I'm like, did I completely just ignore a question?
No, absolutely not. I think it was more, I don't know, it's quite a personal question, I guess, about your personal kind of journey into what you're doing now, and how you have reflected on it over the last year. And I guess like having all those very kind of different and diverse experiences, which I guess, you know, on paper perhaps look very different and diverse, but I guess for you is very normal in a way. Like, I don't know how, like, if that kind of background of having these different, that, like, yeah, how that's affected, does that still influence you, do you think, when you're creating work? Of course.
For sure, yeah. When I'm creating, living, I mean, everything, as I said before, right, like, everything feeds into and everything, and I also, I mean, I encourage that. Like, I don't want to just like throw away. I'm like, give it to me. Like, I'm just to build my muscles, like a little marketing, a little accounting studies, like how can I use this? You know, like in Cutler Spring, I busted out my one of my kind of briefcase portfolios that I used in like my business school days. Again, this like archival practice, you know, and okay, I could look at it as just like, oh, I'm using this object to symbolize this, that, or the other thing. But then it's like, wow, I mean, so multi-purpose. The moment that I kind of like open the briefcase in Cutler Spring, like, gosh, it just like, it makes me feel like I'm Shira. And I keep referring to Shira. It's because of my son. I'm watching it with my son. But, you know, she's like the power of Grayskull. And she like takes out her sword and she like becomes like extra powerful and extra able to take on the world. And I feel that same way with the sound of this Velcro opening on this briefcase. I mean, it's completely improbable, but like, it's like a chain, it's like a kind of a chain reaction of thought that started with business school. Like, everything can lead to something and we just like never know what can feed what. And this is something that I'm just eternally fascinated with. I was listening to this podcast this week, and the person was talking about, you know, the education system is so ridiculous, like, which I agree with, a lot of things are problematic, but she's like, you know, when am I ever going to use geometry in life? You know, when am I going to, she's like, what, we learn these things and we don't use them. I'm like, you can use everything you learn. Something can come in handy for everything. Like every episode of Seinfeld that I've watched can inform like what I know about, I don't know, coffee. I don't know, like we can glean information from everywhere. I'm really fascinated with that, and yeah, how it can shape your life.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of very positive, and also like allows endless opportunities in terms of the way you view the world around you, I guess. And I think, yeah, your work obviously does that in a very personal way, but then allows the audience, offers the audience a completely different journey into that way of thinking, which, yeah, I hope our audiences at Kyoto Experiment will enjoy as well. So yeah, thank you so much. We've gone a bit over, but I think that's really great. So thank you so much.
No problem.